This is Iqbal Jonathan Lewis, and I'm Shahabuddin David Less. Both of us had the fortune to be students of a wonderful visionary whose name was Samuel L. Lewis. And he died in 1971. But before that, he shared with us and the world an idea and a plan for peace in the Holy Land. In the last 55 years since his death, we've actually made some progress in the furthering of a vision for peace in the Holy Land. And we'd like to offer some history and some background so that everyone can know how this happened. And that's what hopefully we'll do today.
Good. So, yes, that's why we're here, is to record some historical data. So, as Shahabuddin said, people know what we're doing here, what really happened, and where we are. Okay, so in 1970, I moved into the house with Murshid Samuel Lewis. And let's just say he was a great mystic and very, very strong. And the reason I'm saying this and powerful is because things just happened there. And the formation of Hallelujah the Three Rings, which is the predecessor of the Abrahamic union, just happened one day. But it didn't happen, but it did happen. And what happened was I was standing in the living room of Sam's house, which I was now living in. It was a very small commune. And I had this feeling and realization and understanding of unity. In that case, it was unity through business. And that a common language was money, which, works sometimes and doesn't work other times. And, but it was this feeling of unity and everything worked. And then, I can honestly say before I knew it, Hallelujah the Three Rings was formed. And he appointed me the head of it, the president.
What was Hallelujah the Three
Hallelujah
Rings?
the Three Rings was this. It was Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and he felt like those were the major components, religious components in the Middle East. So we called it Hallelujah, which is a mantra, Hallelujah, and the three rings were the three religions joined together. And the idea of Hallelujah the Three Rings was to work for peace in the Middle East. And this was 1971, or the end of 1970.
So Hallelujah the Three Rings was based on a play. And the play was about a king who had three sons. And they all wanted to be the successor of the king when he died. And the king had a ring on his finger that proved him to be the king. And in order to find out which one was really the right one for the successor, he gave each of them three identical rings. So nobody could know which was the real ring. And he said, we'll find out what was the real ring by the way they govern. If they all govern well, there'll be no trouble, the three of them living together and being together and ruling together, which was the hope for the Holy Land. Each of the three rings, in this case, each of the three religions, brings a gift. And if one could really rule better than the other, that would naturally rise to the top and the people would follow that person. If they all could rule together, how strong that would be, and there would be a clear idea that they were all the successors of the king. So that's where the name came from. I think it was a play by Lesser.
Called Nathan the Wise.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot that. Senior moment.
That's what it was called.
Yeah.
So, the interesting thing is that as Shahabuddin and I sit here, there's 55 years since Murshid Sam created Hallelujah, the Three Rings. And in that 55 years, the whole feeling for the Middle East has changed, although it hasn't changed at all. And it's hard to describe. So here's what we did in 1970 through the 80s. We formed Hallelujah, the Three Rings, and we felt like the major work was in the Middle East, the center being Jerusalem, and there was some work here in San Francisco. In Jerusalem, when we got there, there were four of us. There was Benefsha Guest, Michael Guest, Jonathan Lewis, and eventually Howard Haas. And everybody took a function. Howard Haas directed, wrote, and created a play called Parsifal the Clown. And the play was funded by Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem. And in the play there were men and women, Americans, Israelis, Palestinians, and some other people from other countries, blacks and whites, Americans, Israeli, Palestinians. I said that, right?
Yep.
And so the group, the Parsifal the Clown, the show, the participants were actually what the show was about. It was a show about how Parsifal the Clown, and the show was done, by the way, in Hebrew and in English and in Arabic. So the show demonstrated to the children who watched it, everyone working together. And another part of the work was Michael Guest went to a university in Israel, and he got a plot of land where he planted and tended to and experimented with drought-resistant plants, because that was part of Murshid Sam's vision. And Benefsha rented and ran a house on the Mount of Olives, in which every Friday she held a Shabbos and invited everyone. And my job was really through business, and so I would travel in either direction, from Israel through Jordan to Syria to Egypt, sometimes the Sudan, sometimes Turkey, and then home. Or sometimes I'd land in Egypt, go to Damascus, come through Jordan to Israel. And the function I had and the vision I had was you could create unity through business. You could deal with people who are very, very different than you and find a common ground, and it would work. And it did work. And I formed a business called Jerusalem Unlimited, which was a wholesale business that imported things from these lands. And I also had a store in San Francisco called the Jerusalem Shop, which started out selling a lot of goods from the Middle East, but it eventually became a boutique with a few goods. But the name, the Jerusalem Shop, got the message across.
If I may just add something, Murshid Sam had a vision for peace in the Holy Land. And he said, if you could, what we would now say, be in a drone above the area, and you eliminated all the political boundaries, he said this could be one of the most fertile areas in the world if it wasn't for the political differences. So he developed this peace plan, and as he said to both of us many times, he took it to Gunnar Yaring. Gunnar Yaring was the Undersecretary of the United Nations. And there were, obviously, this was in the 60s, there were other ideas for peace in the Holy Land, and Gunnar Yaring said this plan was the most sensible plan he's seen. And what's the key to the plan? The key to the plan is if you take away the differences and start to see the wholeness, the similarity, the oneness, the area and the people could be happy and functioning and successful. One more thing, the house that Benefsha set up was on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is technically in East Jerusalem, meaning it's in a Palestinian area of Jerusalem. In 1970s, in the 70s, there was no violence against the house, that she had a Shabbat service every Friday where people of all the faiths could come together. There was no idea that let's burn the house down, let's eliminate these people. It was just accepted, okay, here are these young kids, because we used to be young at the time, who are doing something for the peace of all of us. And it was accepted. And the Mount of Olives is a special and holy place. So the idea of a unified vision was not new. It was something whose time had come and still is.
Right. So the part that I played was traveling. Remember, I would say flying to Israel, and by then I had discovered that goods from the Middle East were sellable in the United States, and so I would go into the old city in Jerusalem and buy dresses and amber and rugs and things like that, and send it back to America. And then I would travel to Damascus, where I would buy, well, I guess rugs and and clothes and embroidered clothes and artifacts. And then I'd go to Egypt, where I bought basically the same thing: lots of jewelry, amber, children's tapestries, and other things. And then when I brought it back to America, I would sell it. And as one of the most remarkable things that happened is, at one point, the guy I was dealing with, who was a Palestinian living in Egypt, after we had collected a lot of goods and I was going to pay him, he said to me, well, why don't you not pay me and just bring them to America, and when you get there, pay me? And I thought, what? I mean, it was strange, and it was beautiful.
Was it a lot of money?
It was at least $10,000,
which in those days
was a lot of money. So basically, what happened is this guy offered me an interest-free loan because I could use the money to buy more goods because I had the money at home, and so that taught me a lot about what was really going on there, and how the Palestinians and Egyptians acted and how they felt. There was a lot of trust, and it worked. And I worked for a decade doing this, and it was extraordinary. And then I would go to Syria, and I buy a lot of things, and then I buy mainly rugs, and then I would, ship them back to America, blah blah blah, and artifacts. And then one day, he said to me, one of the guys said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a New York Jew," and it was great. It was just a surprise to him, and it was a surprise to me that it took him this long to figure it out. But we continued to trade, we continued to do business, and it was the same thing in Jerusalem with the Palestinians and the Israelis. You went, you paid your bills, you got a fair price, you bought sufficient merchandise that made it worthwhile for them. And through this effort, I built up a business. I supported my whole family. I helped them support their families, and this was, an example of peace in the Middle East.
Did they know about Hallelujah, the Three Rings?
No.
That was smart.
Yeah. No, absolutely not.
But, but the one thing that we learned at that time, I'm including myself because I went to Israel in 1971 or two, um, was the difference in cultures. And that's what Iqbal's talking about. And even today in the Abrahamic reunion, one of the difficult things for me as a board member of the Abrahamic reunion is to help our culture, our way of thinking, understand the Middle Eastern culture. And hearing you talk about business like this, you really began to understand the culture. And I was explaining this to someone the other day, a young guy who's 32, and he said, "Well, what's the difference?" And I held up a coffee cup like this one. And I said, "You see this cup? If you see this cup, it's green on the outside, it's white on the inside. It holds coffee, it has a handle. If someone said to you, what was that cup like? You could then go on and say it was green on the outside, white on the inside, and clay, and so on. If we're in the Middle East, and I held up this cup to describe it, I would say something like, this cup was given to my mother the day before her wedding. She actually was given two and one broke. And I would go on and tell the story of that cup. Now, when we say this as Westerners, we kind of get impatient. Just tell me what the cup was like. Don't give me all the stories. But you learn in dealing with the Middle East, and this is of the four religions there, you need to listen to the stories because they matter. They have cultural importance. It's a way of connecting one person to another. So, what did you find out about the culture that you learned?
Well, one thing I found out is that the guy I dealt with, the family I dealt with in Damascus was called Kawaji, which means coffee. And they got the name because when the Bedouins, hundreds of years, came to Damascus, his great great grandfather used to greet them and give them coffee. So it was the House of Kawaji, which is coffee. And so I'll tell this one story. One day I was in Damascus, and this guy owned a big shop, and there were a lot of Europeans and Palestinians and Syrians in there buying. And he said to me, "Come, I want to show you something." So he takes out a key that's this big and he puts in a door. He opens the door. There's a 40-watt bulb in there, and the whole room is filled with antiquities. And he said, this room is to the antiquities dealer what heroin is to the addict. I mean, and I was like, okay. Now remember, I was in my 20s and I was incredibly naive. And he said, so I'll tell you something, he said. And he picked up something and he said, I'm going to sell you this. And he named the price and he said, it was 2000, remember these numbers, 2013, I'm making it up, but I'm not making it up, 2013 years before Christ. And then he picked up something else. He said, and this was 2078 years before Christ. And I said, and I was thinking, okay, I don't know how you're going to tell this and all that. Anyway, I bought a few and I brought them back to America. And I went to the Berkeley Archaeology and Artifacts Department, and I laid out the stuff, and they said to me, "You see this? This is 2013 years before Christ, and you see this one? This is 2078 years before Christ." It was exactly what he said, and I was heartened and. It wasn't like it wasn't like selling plastic copies. These were artifacts that were buried in the ground that helped the farmer pray for fertility of children, of the crops, of the sun, of the rain, and I still have them. But so that's a story because the trust, and I was thinking, well, I don't know, we'll see. But no, it was right to the moment.
Well, if I can tell a quick story that happened the same time, early 70s, I was there and I wanted to buy a present from um, the old city of Jerusalem for my parents. And I went to this dealer that I had become friends with. Ali Mohammed Sheikh was his name. And he lived in the West Bank, and I drove there in an Israeli license plate rent-a-car to his house, and there were no issues, no problems. And this was just a few years after the 1967 war. Anyway, I told him that I wanted to buy something unique, and he pulled out a little piece of Roman glass, a little bottle. It was shaped like that. And it was beautiful and old, and I held it, and then he said, now give it to me. And he said, now watch. And he let go. The bottle hit the floor and bounced and bounced and bounced. I thought, what's going on? He said, this I made from shaving cream and sawdust. And then he pulled out a bottle and he said, don't drop this one. It's the real thing. And I gave it to my parents, who also took it to someone to take a look at. And they said, this is an actual piece of an old Roman glass bottle from around the time of Christ. They didn't give me the dates. So there was humor in the fake bottle. He wanted to show me that. And there was joy that I was taking something and giving it to my parents, which was very appreciated by himself, that it was going to go to my parents. He liked that a lot. And there was, at that time, an opening, an openness, a hopefulness, even among all the different religions there. And unfortunately, because of fundamentalism on all the religions, narrowness, and I'm right and you're wrong, that feeling has disappeared. If I can tell one more story. This again took place, oddly enough, on the Mount of Olives. We have a friend there. He's still there now. And he was young, living in his house with his whole family, which was about, at that time, I think he said 15 or 16 people. And the 1967 war had ended, and the Israelis had taken the Mount of Olives it used to be part of Jordan. Jerusalem was separated. And he said, we didn't know what to do. We were all so afraid. We were sure that the Jewish army was going to come and kill us. And so we stayed locked in our house. After 3 days, he said, there was a hard knock on the door. And we said, don't answer it, don't answer it. They're coming to kill us. One of the young kids went to the door and opened the door. And there were, sure enough, Israeli soldiers there with helmets and guns and so on. But they had a big bag. It still tears me up. So what was in the bag? It was enough bread for 50 people. And they took the bag and they gave it to them and they said, we want to make sure you're okay. And he said, this was our first encounter with Israeli Jews, and frankly, it changed him forever. So these are the early stories from the early days. And don't forget also that the Israeli Jews were not just Ashkenazi Jews, not just European Jews. There were also Sephardic Jews, many of them. The Sephardic Jews came from Arab cultures, and they were used to living in Arab cultures. Many had Arab names, and somehow they managed to get along for 600, 700, 800 years. And in Spain, during the 1200s, it was called the Golden Age. Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together side by side. Friends, they shared holidays, they shared meals, They shared relationships. They really were one family. It really was a golden age. And certainly, if there's been a golden age, there can be a golden age in the future if we do it right.
Well said. When I was in Israel, I stayed with an Iranian Jewish family. And when the mother and father didn't speak English to this day. But the sons were, glib and wonderful, and they were the guys who like picked me out of the street and said, "Stay at our house," and it was always an experience staying there. And one thing that Shahabuddin and I share more. I mean, there's a lot of things, but one thing is, there's been a lot of trouble in the Middle East, war, killing, this and that, but we haven't. It's not like we haven't given up hope. No. It's more than that. It's that we believe that peace is possible. And that if you believe peace is possible, even though things go into the shredder, it's you still believe peace is possible because this is life. And, it brings to mind like Murshid Sam Lewis's idea was that there would be part of, at that time, Hallelujah, the Three Rings, which would concentrate on crops, drought-resistant crops. There would be the house on the top of the Mount of Olives where people were fed and talked together. There would be commerce in which there was commerce. People would talk and exchange money and goods, and everyone was getting what they wanted. And there would be entertainment, which was Parsival the Clown, which was highly cultural, and other things. And, one time, in part of this work, in 1980, we visited with the cabinet minister of energy in Egypt. For this interview, I forget his name. And we introduced him to ocean thermal energy conversion. And that was taking the difference, the temperature difference between the water that was warmer at the top and colder at the bottom, and converting it to energy, and then taking the seawater and making it fresh water, and also bringing up the nutrients from the bottom of the sea so there could be fishing, and much more complicated than that. In Egypt, even though we visited the cabinet minister with no interview, and he kept saying, "Yeah, I need an interview. You need an appointment." I kept saying, I didn't mean interview, I meant appointment. We said, "Well, here we are." And he listened, and he put us in touch with the man who worked at a university, who was the contact with the United States. And they presented this idea to the U.S., and it was denied, mainly because it was an experimental technology. And but that's where we got to. And we also talked to the people who were negotiating, the Israelis who were negotiating with the Palestinians at that time. And we got to talk to them. And so even though we were young and had long hair
and naive,
we got to tell our story and ask people the questions. And so it moved along. And Shahabuddin, we were talking about it, and we were talking about, well, okay, someone might ask, what happened after the 80s? Well, we were naive enough we didn't organize tightly. We didn't have an organization that had a tight structure that could live through change. And when change came, it kind of, we dissipated and we dissolved the group. But, I could tell 100 more stories. How in some ways, in all my years working there, and for 10 years I made 18 trips to Jerusalem and the Middle East, and I only met one person who didn't like the idea. Everyone else, maybe 1,000 people I spoke to, and these were just people, were for it. And I lived on top of the Mount of Olives in an Arab village, a Palestinian village, and there was no one was hostile towards me, and they certainly weren't hostile towards the idea. And I was greeted there. I lived there. It was fine.
Yeah. So just a little background now on the bridge from that to the Abrahamic reunion. The Abrahamic reunion came out of a trip that I took with really 35 of my friends in the year 2000 for the millennia change, the Y2K change, at the end of that millennia and the beginning of the next. We were there. And again, the Mount of Olives comes into play because for New Year's Eve, I believe it was New Year's Eve, we went up on the Mount of Olives, and you can look down at Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And we saw the mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we saw the south wall of the temple, the Wailing Wall, not the south wall, the western wall of the temple. And we did see the south side of the temple, and we could see the churches in the old city, and we could see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I remember standing there, it was just after dusk, and it was all one story with different chapters and different ways of understanding, but it was all one story. Well, subsequently, over the years, that story began to break down. Separation became stronger and stronger for many different reasons, not just political. People became afraid, people became segregated, they weren't speaking to one another. And I met some beautiful peacemakers, and they just were not coordinating together. They had no organization. There were peace organizations, but they weren't as focused on unity, frankly. That's not a criticism, just my observation. So we began to bring peacemakers together. We learned a good lesson. You can't just leave people in a traumatized area. And by that time, by the year 2000, there was more trauma. The first Intifada happened. That was the young Palestinians really getting fed up with the rulership by the Israelis and the occupation, and there was fighting back and forth. A little aside, I might add, my son and I were there 18 months later, and there was an incident which we saw, and it was some young kids throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. And quite frankly, nobody was taking it too seriously. These kids could have been 12 years old. There was no shooting, there was no tear gas, but it was an event that was not that noteworthy. Shortly thereafter, I won't say which station, but we saw it on one of the news stations, and it was blown up to this big event of, it was just completely not what happened. And it really taught us a lesson. By the way, this was the same trip where we were walking down the street right by the old city, and suddenly we heard an explosion. And I said to and there was silence after the explosion. And I said to my son, what was that? Because my mind refused to accept it. And it turns out it was a Palestinian suicide bomber who had blown up a bus in Jerusalem, and 16 people were killed. This was a few hundred meters from where we were walking. And it changed me. Both of those events really changed me. And I saw that it's going to take a lot of patience, really a lot of patience and a lot of belief to overcome the mental conditioning that peace is impossible. It's not. As you said, peace is possible. So out of that, we grew and grew, and I'm not going to go into the whole history of the Abrahamic reunion, but in 2004, we took a group of peacemakers to Istanbul to get out of Israel, and we met together. We kind of had a retreat together, and everybody shared their hopes, shared their fears, and out of that meeting, the name came the Abrahamic reunion. And we grew from there, and one last really critical point happened about 10 years ago. No, I guess it's more now, maybe 14 years ago. I was in Israel and working with a beautiful man who was a peacemaker, and his name is Ghassan Manasra. And in that year, I think Ghassan was 47, he had 3 strokes. And he and I and Anna Less sat down together, and I said to him, you have to stop, you have to get out of here. You have 5 children and a wife and many others who depend upon you. You've had 3 strokes. If you continue to do this stressful work, you're going to be dead. And I think I can say publicly that his house was invaded by radical Muslims. His son was stabbed repeatedly and in a coma for 2 months, his oldest son. Ghassan ended up in the hospital for a week, and when he woke up, he said, I didn't know if any of my family was still alive. And we continued this conversation, and he said, where would I go? And I said, come to America. And he did. We worked on it, and he came to America, and he has been critical in bringing the message of peace to the Arab community, the Jewish community, the Christian community in the Middle East. Why? Because he's clean. He's not a man of ego, he's a man of purity. And he has the real faith in him that peace is possible and peace will come. And he's still our international director. He goes back to Israel 4 and 5 times a year and still is respected by all the parties, even the ones who really don't agree with him. They still respect the work that he's doing and the work that we're doing in the Abrahamic reunion. And maybe that's enough for now. Okay with you?
No. Well, it's okay with me, but this is inspiring.
Yeah.
So, yes, we should close, but I do want to say, hopefully, just one more thing, and that is that this is, talking with Shahabuddin has shown me that, Hallelujah, the 3 Rings and the Abrahamic Union are based on an ideal, and it's impossible to kill an ideal. And even though it's changed its clothes and it's changed its speech, the ideal hasn't changed at all. It's still peace in the Middle East and peace amongst people, peace amongst brothers, and sisters, however you want to put it. So it's I hope this talk, whoever listens to it, can feel inspired, because it certainly worked on me.
Well, if I can sneak in 2 more quick stories. One
Sure.
is the logo of the Abrahamic reunion, if you look at it, is 3 rings interlocking. And that was done on purpose to continue the tradition, the seeds that were planted by Hallelujah, the 3 Rings. And maybe the Abrahamic reunion in name 100 years from now won't exist. But as Iqbal said, the ideal will exist. The ideal must exist. We must continue this work. It's really important. And the last thing, And I'm not going to go over all the projects that we've done. That's for a different kind of communication. But the last thing is the one job that I really, really dislike is asking people for money. And so, what is really my job in the Abrahamic reunion? Maybe I offer inspiration and so on, but the real thing is help support us so this work continues. Who knows what it'll be in the future? We don't, but it will not die. It will not die. And if you support us, I can say this from my own experience, you'll feel good. You'll feel good. You'll feel you're part of the future, part of an inspiration. Because peace is coming. We know that. So, thank you all.
Okay. And now.
Oh, well, don't fight me here.
Okay.